So in the recent months, Wartaken has been adding a lot of vehicles which basically have the definition of spoon feeding you and giving you the victory for absolutely no effort, to be honest. And there unfortunately isn't too many vehicles which are just skilled in general. That has actually been taken away from Wartaken for quite a while now. So in this video, guys, I will be talking about the top 10 most skilled vehicles in the game, which I believe take most effort to use and actually get kills with. And this video idea was actually suggested to me in my official Discord server, so if you'd like to actually suggest another video idea, then make sure to join the Discord, link in the description. So firstly, I'm going to actually be starting with a ship, and this is one of the ships which not that many people actually end up using, and that is the PGO-2. This vehicle is basically the definition of a movement ship, which if it's played right, it will be able to basically annihilate any enemy in the sky, while also being pretty decent against ships. But keep in mind that you do have to use the smoke very well, because once you're fighting ships, they will be shooting at you with 10 missiles, so you basically gotta time the smoke perfectly if you want to be able to dodge pretty much every single one of them. With this vehicle is just overall really good in terms of being able to take down air vehicles, and I believe it does take a lot of skill to use, since the Gatling gun is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not also the best either. Once again, this vehicle is also a ship after all. Now, a vehicle which is actually going to be above it by just a little bit is also going to be having a very similar playstyle. However, I believe it's much more skilled because it is just a glass cannon vehicle. This hovercraft does not actually have the smoke. The only things that are really going for it is going to be some decent brute force, which you can actually use really effectively against air vehicles. However, if you don't want to end up getting hit, you really need to use your movement correctly and actually understand how opponents are leading their shots. Because if you don't, they're just going to end up getting shredded by helicopters, which is the reason why I would actually put this vehicle pretty high on this list. Now, the next vehicle which is right above it is actually going to be the TOS, and the simple reason why I'm actually going to be putting it pretty high on this list is because, let's be honest, we were all disappointed with the TOS as a vehicle. We don't think it was executed correctly. It's not that good at all, which is exactly what makes this vehicle skilled. It has a lot of technical issues which you actually have to work around, such as if you want to aim all the way up and actually shoot somebody with the guided missiles. Let's just say that's not going to be very easy. The TOS is also one of the only guided missile tanks in the game which are not able to actually one-tap their targets, so you literally have to hit 2 guided missiles against somebody in the sky to actually be able to kill them. Another thing which I believe is also very skilled in this game as a whole is also artillery, and the simple reason why I believe that is because the artilleries in general have to be very strategic, or else they might end up not being very strong at all, to be honest. Like the free fire rockets, they don't really take much effort. However, if you want to actually end up getting some good damage from the TOS and the enemies are using movement, then you really need to understand how to lead your shots correctly and how to actually get the shot to hit the enemy. So that's why I'm going to be putting the TOS so high on this list. Now, the next one right here is also a vehicle which almost nobody uses, and I have to say it's a big shame, but that's going to be the Harrier 2. The main reason why the Harrier isn't so prominent in this matter right now is simply because its turning speed is absolutely terrible. It's not good in this regard. It's so hard to even get a proper loop on this, and how long it takes to actually do so is also another issue of the Harrier. I believe the Veto does actually take a lot of skill to use correctly, especially if you are using it against air targets like the helicopters, or also using it against planes which are basically rushing at you. If you're just gonna turn on the Veto in the middle of a dogfight, I don't believe that's skill in any regard. However, if you're using it for any other different means of combat, then I do definitely agree that it is very difficult to use. Now, the next vehicle which I'm also going to be putting above the Harrier, which I personally have been using quite a lot recently, is actually the standard M1 Abrams. This thing has been heavily powercraft. There are also a lot of tanks which have been powercraft, like the standard T-72. We also got the Leopard 2A7 and etc. But I'm mainly going to be focusing on the M1 Abrams over here, and the simple reason why is because this thing's cannon damage is not good at all. The machine gun is also just below average. It's not very good by any means, and the reason why I'm putting it so high is because you have to actually be very strategic with how you're going to be hitting the enemy with the cannon if you want to actually be able to win against all the meta tanks. Like, you have to, I believe, pull at least 3 to 4 cannon shells to be able to actually destroy a tank on average with this thing, which is actually extremely sad. So you definitely have to be using the environment very well and actually play very sneaky. However, another thing which I also find very skilled about the standard Abrams is just being able to shoot planes out of the sky just like any other tank would be able to do. I'm mainly gonna be talking about the tanks which are not very good, and the M1 Abrams is just simply one of them. Of course, tanks as a whole are a very skilled vehicle class. However, I believe this one, out of all of them, is probably going to be very high on this list. Now, the next one being is actually going to be the K9 Thunder SPG. And once again, this thing is an artillery, but what makes this thing the most skilled of all the artilleries in the game, in my opinion, is that you only have one shot. You have only one opportunity to be able to kill the enemy. If you miss, you die. Like, for example, if an Abrams X is literally coming at you, most of the time, if you end up missing the shot, you're just gonna end up dying if they come close to you. It's simple as that. It doesn't have any APS, its health isn't very strong. This vehicle in general is only going to be good if you use it correctly. With this, the smart flak cannon is also not very good against our targets because the flak actually makes you miss the shot a lot of the time. And another thing is that you have to perfectly aim the shot to be able to actually one-tap an enemy, because the flak is already nerfing you as a whole. So in general, I do believe that the K9 Thunder is one of the most skilled vehicles in this game, and I'm always going to be standing by that just because of the simple fact that it's just so incredibly hard to use, and if you do make one simple mistake, you're pretty much dead. Now, the next vehicle on this list is actually going to be a pleasant surprise for a lot of SU25 Frogfoot lovers, but I'm actually going to be putting this vehicle as the 4th place over here, and the simple reason why is because this vehicle doesn't really have anything that's super unskilled about it. The air missiles are most of the time gonna end up being useless because one of them is gonna end up getting flared, so let's just act like these air missiles don't even exist. Now you are left with a kit of terrible turning speed, a strong cannon, rockets, and bombs, and to me that is the definition of pure skill in terms of planes in this game, because you could use these rockets kind of efficiently even in terms of air combat if you manage to place your shots really well and actually lead them. With this, the bombs are also incredibly hard to hit, especially on moving targets. This vehicle is in general just a god in terms of potential. However, if you're not gonna end up using it correctly, then it's just gonna end up being a bad vehicle, which is why it's not a good plane in general. Now, the next vehicle which is going to be in the number 3 position is going to be the AH1Z Viper, and the rest of this list is basically going to be helicopters. In my opinion, helicopters are the hardest vehicle class to use if you're going to be using the fixed cannons. However, they also have the best potential. What's so interesting about the AH1Z Viper is that the air missiles a lot of the time are just gonna end up being useless, because once again you're gonna be flaring at least one of them, so on the second one will be hitting and doing just a bit of damage. But the main thing about this thing is the cannon, and in my opinion using fixed cannons in this game is just in general very hard as a whole, and these rockets are also not very good on the Viper, so you're pretty much just fully left with a helicopter that has to rely on its cannon to be able to do major damage to the enemy. And another thing which is also really cool about the Viper as a whole is if you do actually have a teammate which is going to be using the Gatling gun with you, which is going to be the second person seat gun, you could make this thing also a team play vehicle, which might end up being incredibly strong for that reason. However, in general, anything that's really has a fixed gun in this game is just very difficult to use. Now, another vehicle which I believe is much more skilled than the AH1Z Viper is going to be the KA52 Alligator, and the simple reason why is because this thing does not actually use missiles, so that already takes away from the one unskilled thing which the Viper has. However, what makes the Alligator so much harder to use is the guns are extremely spread out, meaning that you have to lead your shots even more differently than what you would have to do with all the other helicopters. You guys can definitely see the difference here from a standard heli. A standard heli's guns will be around right here, where the KA52s are more at the back, which is what makes this thing even harder to use. And in general, anybody which I see always using this vehicle, I always respect them so much because it is extremely power crept, and it really doesn't have a reason to exist in this game, except for just being a vehicle for the OG War Tycoon players, which really like to have fun with the content, which is not very good at all, to be honest. And now the last vehicle, which in my opinion is probably the most skilled vehicle in War Tycoon, I'm going to be placing the MI24 Hind in the number 1 spot, and this might come off as a surprise to a lot of players. However, I'm gonna be making some things really simple. The air missiles on this thing basically do 0 damage and they're basically useless, and there is no point of actually be using them. Their lock-on speed is also absolute trash, so now you are left with a packet of a helicopter which has a lot of of major flaws, which you have to actually get around if you want to use it correctly. The DPS is overall extremely strong on these guns, and this vehicle does have 3 cannons, which are just amazing. However, the issue with them is that they have bullet fall-off, and bullet fall-off is extremely hard to use, especially against air vehicles, because, for example, an air vehicle is right in front of you. You have to actually aim a little bit higher for the bullet to actually get to the enemy, just because of how much it falls off. Another thing that's also very interesting about this is that you do have to be very skilled at actually leading shots against moving tanks, which are going around 65 miles per hour with this. That's also another thing. And one more thing you have to take into consideration while using the MI24 Hind is that you are in gigantic hitbox, and that to me is just a simple nerf to the MI24 Hind, which makes this thing even harder to use. But anyway, for the time being, that's going to be all I have for you guys in today's video. Do let me know in the comment section down below how would your most skilled list actually look like. I'm very curious what you guys would pick. Of course, keep in mind that all these picks are very subjective and everything could really go either way. The MI24 Hind really doesn't have to be in the #1 spot. However, at least for me and a lot of other players, this thing just comes to be very hard to use, but if you do master it, then it's going to be an absolute blast to actually play with. Anyway, I'll see you guys next video. Have a great day, and thank you so much to all my channel members.